When The Black Phone released, I'll admit it didn't really move me. I didn't even see it until it was released on physical media and I picked it up a good few months later. Truth be told, I hadn't expected much. Another Blumhouse horror, another supernatural figure, and another big twist at the end of the movie, one of which did not even happen. I figured it was something we'd already seen before, and I also thought we would just forget about it the next time another Blumhouse film rolled out on the release slate. Instead, it actually ended up sticking around. Central to a lot of the discussion was Ethan Hawke's The Grabber, a child snatcher with an interchangeable mask that became the film's icon overnight. Plastered across the internet and the marketing in a way that felt like we were watching Blumhouse crown their next big mascot. The Black Phone is but one of many Blumhouse films that taps into a fear that they are well familiar with at this point. It's a horror story that follows a kid in a world where adults have failed him, about trauma and survival, and also a little bit about Ethan Hawke sitting at the top of the stairs shirtless, waiting to beat a child with a belt. Regardless of that, I think it's a pretty strong entry to modern horror in how it blends childhood terror with supernatural catharsis, how it crafts one of Blumhouse's most memorable villains, and why the movie works even when it doesn't fully hold together. So in our continuation of Spooky Month, let's talk about it. One of the things that sets The Black Phone apart from the off is the focus on kids in danger. Now, that's by no means new to horror. Stephen King has practically monopolised and built a career on putting children in danger and then watching them sink or swim, but Derrickson, who explored it to some degree in Sinister, doubles down here. Finney is our protagonist, a shy kid living in 1970s suburban America, and from the very beginning we see the world against him. He's bullied at school, being ignored by adults, and at home he's dealing with an abusive father who takes his grief out on his children. There is something depressingly real about this movie, despite the supernatural tendencies. There's no sense of safety for Finney to run to. The people who are supposed to look after and protect Finney and Gwen actively do the opposite. That's what makes the additional stories of this character named the Grabber hit with such force. He metaphorically enters a home that is already fractured and vulnerable, symbolic of the world around them. The Grabber is unfortunately just another one of the predators that plague this planet. This is where Derrickson pulls on an old horror thread. The idea that childhood is terrifying because of how powerless it is. So many of us have probably experienced that childhood memory of walking home and seeing a strange car slow down nearby, realizing you can't explain your fear to an adult without being laughed off or dismissed. If you have had that, you know the fear this film is channeling. It's the horror of not being taken seriously, of being small in a world that feels as though it's trying to crush you. To expand on that, it's actually one of the aspects that I feel The Black Phone is the strongest in, and that is the dedication and the strength in its time and setting. This is a time where kids roamed free, when missing posters were becoming an unfortunate staple, and when predators like John Wayne Gacy lurked only in cultural imagination. Derrickson pulls from all of that in order to remind us that the scariest thing about being a kid in this era is that you're at mercy of forces you can't understand nor control. The supernatural element comes into the film through its namesake, the Black Phone. Once Finney is kidnapped and locked in the Grabber's basement, a disconnected rotary phone on the wall begins to ring. On the other end are the voices of many of the Grabber's past victims, each one trying to help Finney survive where they failed. This runs the risk of becoming a cheap gimmick, and to be completely honest, it does sometimes do that. The phone doesn't follow any necessary established rules, and it also isn't really given any time to be explained. However, with that being said, this is a film set in a world with some sort of clear supernatural existence, so if this sort of thing isn't a deal breaker to you, then the last 10 seconds of me speaking probably didn't actually mean very much. As a metaphor, this is perfect. The phone is trauma made into a tangible entity. Each ghost is a victim whose story hasn't concluded yet, who passes their pain on in the hope that it can allow someone else to break that cycle. It's a tragic idea. the dead children unable to rest until someone escapes, and Finney has to absorb their lessons of suffering in order to survive. This does also give the movie one of its more striking thematic edges. Finney learns to fight because of the voices of those who were silenced. The movie tries to shift trauma into resistance, showing how even in death, the victims refuse to let the grabber win. Still, I do think this is where the movie stumbles a little bit. The supernatural elements, while interesting, are never fully fleshed out. The phone simply rings because it does, and again, like I said, this is a supernatural world, so that could be ignored, but for me, I'd like just a little bit. I don't need anything in-depth, I don't need anything next level that spells it out for me, I just need something to go off of, and that's an aspect that I am hoping will be explored and explained more in The Black Phone 2, but until that releases and I'm able to see it, I just don't know. Normally, I do love mystery in my horror, but only if it feels like deliberate ambiguity. The phone works here mainly because the story needs it to, and not because it's organically tied into the grabber for any mystical reason. Again, like we know of, that could change. However, I do concede, and this is where I choose to view it, that it does work when you look at it through a lens of metaphor over logic. The phone is less about scares and more about a sense of catharsis. It's a literal lifeline for Finney, a way for him to reclaim power over himself from a world that has stripped it away. That's where the Black Phone lands its emotional punches, even if the mechanics of getting there are a little shaky. The most defining feature that seems to have broken from this film is the grabber, and it's not without hard work. Ethan Hawke is phenomenal here. Now, for most of his career, he's played soulful leads or earnest dads, but the Black Phone is able to allow him to tap into a much darker performance that we've yet to see. He gives the grabber this necessary theatrical quality. The way he slips between simple tones, sudden bursts of rage, and eerie stillness make him feel like a man who's playing roles that even he doesn't fully understand. He's unpredictable, which by nature makes him terrifying. Then there's the mask, designed by horror icon Tom Savini. It's a simple but genius work of iconography, a demonic mask with an interchangeable mouthpiece. So the grabber can literally change his expression from smile, to frown, to blank stare. It's a versatile move, a ready-made brand image. Which brings us neatly onto the Blumhouse aspect of it all. For years they've been quietly building this roster of pretty recognisable faces. You have the Purge masks, Bagul from Sinister, and even the baby-faced killer from Happy Death Day has its flowers. They understand that horror sells best when it gives audiences a face to latch onto. The grabber slots right in, becoming one of the strongest and most disturbing icons they have to date. On one hand, the grabber deserves to be remembered. He's scary, he's striking, and Ethan Hawke's performance elevates him so much higher above being a cliché. However, he's also vague, and his motives very much so. His psychology is thinly sketched, and I think that works here. It leaves a lot of intrigue for the audiences who are curious to see how they're going to develop him further in his supernatural state. Blumhouse has always had a strength in developing mascots, but there have been exceptions, and I'm glad that the grabber didn't fall into that trap. They maintain the depth of the story without focusing too heavily on marketing him as the next big thing. He's their most effective mascot in years, and a reminder that Blumhouse knows how to make horror look iconic. Let's just hope they don't butcher his reputation like another promising mascot of theirs. It would be unfair of me to have talked this long on the film without giving any credit to the direction of Scott Derrickson. After leaving the Doctor Strange sequel, Derrickson returned to his home genre with something a lot more personal, and that definitely shows here. The setting feels lived in, with brown-toned suburbia, wood-panelled basements, and those terrifyingly quiet streets that make you think twice about walking home at night. Derrickson also shows a level of restraint with these supernatural elements. The ghosts are more sorrowful than they are scary, and the phone never turns to a flashy showcase of effects. Instead, he leans in on atmosphere and tension. Those moments are some of the most unnerving in the film, and it's where it finds itself strongest for me. Don't get me wrong, there are still aspects of the Blumhouse formula here and there. The pacing sometimes feels a little rushed, and the third act definitely runs into the crowd-pleasing problem. By the time Finney's able to string together the advice of all the kids into one final assault, the film has transcended horror and turned more into this action thriller set piece. It does work emotionally, but at the same time it's a little too clean considering this is a story about trauma, and that's something that's very rarely as neat as this. Still, compared to a lot of Blumhouse's recent output, The Black Phone is still refreshingly crafted. It's a film with texture, mood, and intent, not falling into the trap of becoming just another quick scarefest. I won't deny that there's a lot to The Black Phone that frustrates me, because there's also a lot that I admire. I admire the ways that it crafts a villain that is as terrifying as he is intriguing, but I'm equally frustrated by the clunky rules and sometimes uneven tonal shifts. Maybe that conflicting feeling is exactly why the movie has lasted longer in my mind than I initially expected it would. Horror, at the end of the day, rarely relies on airtight plotting or flawless execution. It just doesn't happen. It survives because of the figures that crawl into our heads and refuse to leave. For better or worse, The Grabber has become one of those figures. This isn't a perfect film, but it is a pretty effective one. It's the story of a boy who learns to fight back, of ghosts that refuse to leave, and a villain that has already walked into the ranks as one of this decade's horror icons.